Welcome to another Sad Boys book review. My name is Dusty, and I read The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, the first book in the Wheel of Time series, and boy oh boy, I was not ready for this. Bit of backstory here. So, I finished this book in, I think it was October or November of 2023. So, this is the second of my catch up for 2023 Sad Boys book reviews. And I started this book all the way back in 2021. I think by the time 2023 rolled around, I was somewhere in the ballpark of page 250 out of about 750. So about a third of the way through the book. And that is how far I'd gotten in about 2 years. But I didn't restart, and I stuck with it, and I knew 2023 was the year that I was finally going to finish this book. I really made a goal out of it, especially after I finished Elantris, and I was reading it alongside a lot of the books we were reading for the Sad Boys Book Club. And it took longer than I would have liked, but eventually, later on in the year, I did finish it. And man, I really enjoyed this book. It's not a perfect book by any means, but for an introductory novel to a massive, just overarching, long, epic fantasy series, I really don't think it could have started any better than this. I know for a lot of people, from what I have read, I don't know any of the Wheel of Time plot past The Eye of the World. Thankfully, I've done a pretty good job of avoiding any spoilers past what I have actually read. So, just kind of from hearsay of what I know about it from the internet, I know a lot of people, they find The Eye of the World to be a bit of a slower one, a slow start, but they're like, just get through it, and once you get to the Great Hunt, it starts to kind of pick up, and I know about the infamous, like, very slow middle portions of the books before getting it picking up again near the end of the series, which is unfortunate in a 15-book series, but it is what it is. Um, but for me personally, I really enjoyed The Eye of the World for what it was. I know a lot of people will look at it and see it as being another sort of like Tolkien-esque kind of novel, and I can definitely see where that comes from. There's a lot of similar tropes and archetypes that Robert Jordan used that were popularized by Tolkien in Lord of the Rings. Um, a lot of things you can see from a standard hero's journey, even looking at something like Star Wars with Luke Skywalker. There are similarities, I'd say, between uh, Rand Thor with someone like Luke Skywalker or Frodo Baggins, but also maybe a little bit of like Aragorn in there as well, with this sort of like chosen narrative with like him possibly being. This is a bit of a mystery throughout the story. Is he the Dragon Reborn? And there's like three characters that kind of fit that description, and I have some ideas, but the book does not ever explicitly tell you yet, though it very, very heavily hints towards who the Dragon Reborn is, and that is the name of I think, the third book. But you still kind of have this kind of like chosen hero storyline who lives on a farm in a small village, and a tragedy besets his home, and he is hit the call to action to force him to leave his village and go on this grand adventure in order to stop this ever-present, lingering, dark, evil presence that is in the background. You know, it's that is the premise of the Wheel of Time, and I know just having that very broad overview, you can say that for a lot of stories. So yeah, it does have a lot of kind of very tropey elements to it. Um, a lot of very common threads that a lot of stories like this use. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's only a bad thing when it's done poorly. There's a reason why these things are tropes, and it's because they are things that have historically worked throughout literature and throughout the arts. So using them is not necessarily a bad thing. Using them bad is when it becomes, dare I say, bad. So, The Eye of the World is a situation where I personally believe it was used well, And while there were moments where I just, I just couldn't help but laugh to myself and think, well, here's another situation where this reminds me a lot of Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or some other fantastical fantasy media that came before The Eye of the World. It's still fun at the same time. I still enjoyed myself. It didn't take me out of the novel. It didn't take me out of the story or the characters. It didn't make me take things less seriously. But it just, it's kind of something that you have to be aware of if you consume a lot of media like this, because it is one of the most common tropes. But like I said, I do think The Eye of the World does it well. It's got a very large cast of characters, and I imagine that is only going to grow as the series goes on. We have our Emansfield kids, which are Rand al'Thor, Matt, I think it's Matt Cawthon. I could be remembering wrong, but Matt, we'll just say Matt. Perrin, whose last name I've forgotten completely, and then Egwene. I hope I'm saying that right. Egwene. I think there was a pronunciation guide in the back of my book, and I tried my best, but as someone might know, I'm not always the best at it. So those are our Emansfield kids that are part of this adventure. We also have Nynaeve, who is the village. I think they call her a wisdom, and it's like she's kind of like a healer, but also like a wise woman, and she's also relatively young. I want to say she's probably in the ballpark of like early to mid 20s. So those are like our Emansfield characters, and then we also have the Aes Sedai Moraine, who is our mystic kind of call to action mentor figure, kind of similar to our Gandalf or our Obi-Wan Kenobi character, and she is like I said, she's an Aes Sedai, and those are the magical women in the world. That I don't know a more simplistic way to put it. They are the witches, the mages, the female mages, whatever you want to call them. And then we have her protector. There's a term for it. Her warder. That's what he's called. They're called warders, and they're like the bodyguards of the Aes Sedai, and his name is Lan. And that's kind of like that kind of rounds out our main cast a little bit. There are some characters that come and go that I don't want to go too deep into because I don't want to go too deep into spoilers in this. But that's like our general main character ensemble there, and I really enjoyed the characters. This might come as a shock to a lot of people, but I'm a big fan of character writing, especially when it's good character writing, and I do think that The Eye of the World has that. It's very fun, and I think the growth that these characters go throughout the course of the story is pretty natural, and there's not too many instances where I feel like their reactions to a situation feels forced or done purely to progress the plot. Everything feels about as natural as it can given the situations that the characters are thrust into. And even then, the overarching plot that the story tells, I thought was a very well done and engaging start to a very large, sprawling, epic fantasy series. It did not go near as far as I expected it to. For a book that is over 700 pages long, I was kind of shocked as to how, I don't want to say how small the plot was, but I guess how much progression there is in the plot. I was kind of expecting a grander scale to the story, but it felt a lot more narrow when you broke it down. They have their general goal when they set out from their village, and they're like, we want to go here, and that's where we need to go. That's where we need to get there, and that's where we need to be. And my thought process would be like the first half of the book would be getting there, and then the second half of the book would be after they're at their destination. That's when the actual threat of the story pops up, and that's when the characters have to deal with the climax of the novel, the rising force, and then we'll have our climax, our solution, and then we'll end the book, and that'll be that. That's not at all how this book went, and that was honestly a nice thing because it just kind of it bucked my expectations. It did lead to the fact that there is a huge amount of this book that is ostensibly traveling. So anyone who's read The Lord of the Rings, you'll kind of know how that goes with a book that's focused almost primarily on traveling, which sounds really dull when you put it that way, but it's not like it's just a story about we walked down the road, I saw a farm, there was a cow on the farm, we went to the next village, we stayed at an inn. It's nothing like that. There's still, action and intensity and mystery and all of that happens while they're traveling, but it is mostly a traveling book until the climax. Which brings me to probably my biggest criticism of this book, and it's that the third act just it's just a dead sprint. It we have our problem that establishes our final act, the climax of the novel, and there's only like somewhere in the ballpark of 150 to 200 pages left in the book. This is a pure guess on my part, and Jordan just ran us there. There's a lot of things that happen in a very short amount of time, and I do feel like there were a lot of situations where we didn't really get time to breathe. We just kind of kept moving from location to location, from plot point to plot point, and it felt like I was being dragged along by my ears as the reader, seeing all of these locations and seeing these situations that were popping up towards the climax of the novel, and he didn't really give it room to breathe. So if there is a criticism I have for this book, and to be fair, it is a relatively large one, the final act of the book goes at a breakneck pace, whereas the first like 2/3 to about 80% of the book is a much slower paced travel story, a little bit of an adventure with conflict and issues that are dealt with in between. And you know what'll happen when it happens. It's basically once the final call to the plot happens and they need to travel to this final area to do the final thing, that's when it really starts. And there were so many situations where they would set up this location like, oh, this location's very dangerous. Not many people survive going through here, if anyone, and it's going to be very perilous, and it's possible that we may not even make it out. And they're in there for like 1.5 chapters, and then they're gone, and they're now into the next area. And there were threats there, but they were kind of ancillary to anything else. It was just kind of a thing that was an obstacle that may or may not have been in their way, but was just kind of present to give them a sense of urgency to move on to the next location. And that did hurt the book for me. And I do think that's the area of the book where you really need to be firing on all cylinders and you really need to be hitting every single time you can. And I think there were a lot of misses in that final third because of the pacing. And I think that's something that could have definitely been improved upon. Maybe shorten the middle third of the book a little bit, make the traveling a little more tighter, and that way you can expand on your final act a little more and make it flow a little better. That was, if anything, my only issues with The Eye of the World. All in all, was not a major issue to make me hate the book or dislike it even. It just I'm probably rating it 1 point lower than I would have otherwise. So not the biggest of issues, but still a disappointing one all the same, in a book that I thought was very good, that had some pretty decent pacing, maybe a little more on the slower side, even slower than something like Elantris. For most of it, to have it suddenly just kick into high gear and put your foot down and go into more fast car metaphors as I can to say that it speeds up really quickly at the end, it was a bit disappointing. But the story that it told was still good all the same, and the way that it leaves off leading into The Great Hunt, which is the second novel, I think was a great ending point for the book, and it really just kind of set up a lot of anticipation for me to see where these characters go moving forward and how this plot progresses. So with that, my final thoughts on The Eye of the World were that it was a really great start to a legendary series, and while I know a lot of people may not hold The Eye of the World in the highest regard, I still had a lot of fun with it and thought it was a very good starting point for a series. And if people do consider this to be one of the weaker entries because of its intense setup and a lot of kind of borrowed tropes from Tolkien before it kind of finds its own identity in the kind of later on books in like 2, 3, 4, 5, then great. That means I have a lot to look forward to, especially with how much I liked this book already as it was. It's, it's kind of like how I felt with Elantris. There's nowhere to go but up from here. And so with that, I give The Eye of the World an 8 out of 10. I do recommend it if you are into this type of fantasy, but you have to be aware that this is a 15-book series. There are 14 novels plus one prequel. It is a mammoth of an undertaking, and I can't recommend it if that is not something that you are into. But if you are into something that has to deal with characters traveling and having to deal with the issues that come on the road and this big grand story with a lot of characters and a lot of story to tell and probably a lot of downtime in between the big moments, then I think that this is a book and possibly even a series that you might enjoy. But that'll do it for now. This has been another Sad Boys book review. My name is Dusty, and take care.